Security camera captures what no one saw and narrowly exonerates homeless man. Asterisk, the night of March 15th started like any other for Robert Williams. He had found a relatively safe place to sleep in the alley behind Morrison's department store, sheltered from the light rain that was falling over the city. Robert was known in the neighborhood, a middle-aged man who had lost everything after a series of personal tragedies, but who maintained his dignity and never caused trouble. What Robert didn't know was that this night would change his life forever, and that a silent security camera would become the only witness capable of saving him. Around 2:30 a.m., Robert was awakened by loud voices and the sound of breaking glass. Still drowsy, he saw 3 young people running toward him, clearly in a panic. They passed by him like a gust of wind, leaving behind only the echo of their footsteps, and something Robert couldn't immediately identify: a small leather purse. That had fallen to the ground beside where he was sleeping. When Robert picked up the purse to examine it, he didn't have time to fully process what was happening. Police sirens began wailing in the distance, approaching rapidly. Red and blue lights were already illuminating the alley walls when the first officers arrived, following the trail left by the fleeing youths. What the police saw was exactly what anyone would have seen: a homeless man holding an expensive purse near a store that had clearly been robbed. It was a scene that seemed to leave no doubt about what had happened. Robert tried to explain, his words coming out rushed and desperate, but who would believe the word of a homeless man against such obvious evidence? "I didn't do anything," Robert shouted as he was handcuffed. "They ran this way and dropped this. I was sleeping. I swear I was sleeping." But his words were lost in the police action, the crackling radios, and the orders being given. Within minutes, Robert Williams was arrested and charged with armed robbery and breaking and entering. The evidence against him seemed irrefutable. He was found with the victim's purse, was at the crime scene at the right time, and had no alibi beyond his own word. The public defender assigned to his case, Sarah Mitchell, looked at the file with that familiar weariness of someone who had seen similar stories hundreds of times. On the surface, it seemed like another simple case of a homeless man who had crossed the line of legality out of desperation. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just any lawyer. After 15 years working in the public defender system, she had developed a keen instinct for cases that weren't what they seemed to be. Something about Robert's story bothered her. Maybe it was the genuine sincerity in his eyes when he told his version of events. Or maybe it was the fact that in all his years on the streets, Robert had never been arrested for anything more than minor infractions. During her first visit to the jail, Sarah asked detailed questions about the night of the crime. Robert described the young people who had run through the alley, 2 men and a woman, all appearing to be in their 20s. He remembered specific details. One of them wore a red jacket, another had a visible tattoo on his neck, and the woman was carrying something that looked like a weapon. They were scared, Robert insisted. They ran like they were fleeing from something. I didn't even get a good look at what that purse was until the police arrived. Sarah knew she needed more than Robert's word to build a defense. She began investigating the case more deeply, visiting the crime scene and talking to local merchants. It was during this investigation that she discovered something that would change everything. Morrison's store had an extensive security system, with cameras that covered not only the interior of the store, but also the alley where Robert slept. The problem was that the store owner, Mr. Morrison, had initially told police that the alley cameras weren't working that night. When Sarah pressed to see the recordings, Morrison seemed nervous and evasive. He insisted there was nothing useful on the tapes, that the cameras had frequent technical problems. Sarah wasn't convinced. She obtained a court order to access all security recordings from the store for the 48 hours before and after the crime. What she found when she finally gained access to the tapes left her shocked. The cameras were working perfectly, and they had captured everything. The recording clearly showed Robert sleeping in the alley when the three young people came running. More importantly, it showed the exact moment when the purse fell from one of the fugitives' hands and rolled to a stop next to where Robert was sleeping. The camera also captured Robert being awakened by the noise and his genuine confusion upon finding the purse. But what Sarah saw next was even more disturbing. The store's internal cameras showed that the robbery had been an inside job. One of the store employees had disabled the alarm system and left the back door open for the accomplices. Mr. Morrison wasn't involved in the crime, but his reluctance to provide the recordings had a disturbing reason. He knew the cameras had captured his negligence in maintaining the store's security. With the recordings in hand, Sarah knew she had enough evidence to exonerate Robert, but she also discovered something that made the case even more complex. The initial police investigation had been superficial and biased. The detectives responsible for the case had assumed Robert's guilt based solely on his housing situation, without adequately investigating other possibilities. Sarah decided to confront the lead investigator, Detective Mark Stevens, with the evidence. Stevens was a 20-year veteran of the police force, known for his direct approach and, unfortunately, for his well-documented prejudices against the homeless population. When Sarah presented the recordings, Stevens' reaction was revealing. "Look, counselor," Stevens said, clearly uncomfortable. "A guy was there, had the purse, the evidence was obvious. We had no reason to suspect anything else." "Except you didn't investigate," Sarah replied, showing him the camera footage. "You didn't ask to see security recordings, didn't interview witnesses, didn't even check if there were other possible explanations. You saw a homeless man and assumed he was guilty." The recording showed not only Robert's innocence, but also revealed the identity of the real criminals. Sarah was able to identify the three young people through the high-definition images. One of them was a store employee, which explained how they had gained such easy access to the establishment. But most shocking was that this wasn't the first time Stevens had arrested a homeless person without adequate investigation. Sarah began investigating other similar cases and discovered a disturbing pattern. At least 5 other homeless men had been arrested by Stevens under similar circumstances in the past 2 years, all with superficial investigations, questionable evidence. The discovery of the recordings also revealed another troubling aspect of the case. Mr. Morrison had lied about the cameras, not only to avoid questions about security, but also because he knew the recordings would show his negligence in properly checking his employees' references. The employee involved in the robbery had been hired without adequate background verification. Sarah realized this case was much bigger than simply exonerating Robert. It was a matter of systemic justice, of how the legal system treated society's most vulnerable, and of how deeply rooted prejudices could lead to serious injustices. With the irrefutable video evidence, Sarah scheduled an emergency hearing. She knew she needed to act quickly, not only to free Robert, but also to prevent the real criminals from escaping justice. The recordings in her possession were a time bomb that could expose not just this specific case, but an entire pattern of police negligence. The day of the hearing arrived, and Sarah knew she was about to present evidence that would change everything. Judge Harrison, known for his impartiality and attention to detail, examined the recordings with growing concern. As he watched the footage, his expression changed from casual curiosity to genuine shock. These recordings clearly show that the defendant was sleeping when the actual perpetrators ran through the alley, Sarah explained, pausing the video at the exact moment the purse fell. Not only that, but they also reveal that the crime was an inside job with the participation of a store employee. The prosecutor, David Chun, who had built his career on slam-dunk cases against vulnerable defendants, watched the recordings in growing silence. He knew his case had completely collapsed, but the implications were much larger than just a wrongful accusation. Your Honor, Sarah continued, these recordings not only exonerate my client, but also reveal a systematic failure in the police investigation. Mr. Williams spent 4 months in prison for a crime he obviously didn't commit. Robert, sitting at the defense table, watched through tears of relief mixed with anger. 4 months of his life had been stolen. 4 months during which he had been treated as a violent criminal, when in reality he was just a man who had the misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Judge Harrison not only freed Robert immediately, but also ordered a complete investigation into Detective Stevens' practices. The recordings had exposed not just an isolated error, but a pattern of negligence that had affected multiple lives. But the real vindication for Robert came when the recordings led to the arrest of the real criminals. The store employee, Marcus Thompson, and his 2 accomplices were identified and arrested within 48 hours. They had committed not only this robbery, but a series of other similar crimes over the previous months. The case had repercussions that extended far beyond the courtroom. Local media extensively covered the story, highlighting not only the injustice suffered by Robert, but also the broader systemic issues the case had revealed. Robert's release was just the beginning of a larger transformation. The revelation of the security recordings triggered a federal investigation into the local police department's practices, particularly regarding the treatment of homeless individuals. Sarah, now recognized as a fierce advocate for the rights of the vulnerable, became spokesperson for a campaign to reform the criminal justice system. Detective Stevens was suspended and subsequently fired when the investigation revealed he had falsified evidence in at least 3 other cases involving homeless people. His 2-decade career ended in disgrace, but more importantly, his removal meant that other vulnerable individuals would no longer be victims of his prejudices. Robert, in turn, became an unwitting symbol of the need for reform. His story spread through social media and national news, generating conversations about prejudice, justice, and society's treatment of the homeless. Civil rights organizations invited him to speak at events, and he discovered he had a powerful voice for social change. Morrison's store faced its own consequences. Mr. Morrison was fined for security negligence and for attempting to obstruct the investigation. More significantly, he implemented new security protocols and began working with local organizations to provide employment opportunities for homeless people. Sarah used the case's publicity to launch a nonprofit organization dedicated to defending homeless individuals facing criminal charges. She obtained funding to install security cameras in areas where homeless people frequently slept, creating a network of protection against false accusations. The city implemented new training protocols for police officers on how to interact with vulnerable populations. Robert's case became a case study used in police academies across the country, demonstrating how prejudices can lead to serious injustices. Robert found permanent housing through an assisted program that was created partially in response to his case. He began working as a counselor for other homeless individuals, using his experience to help others navigate the legal system and find resources. The technology that had nearly destroyed Robert's life, security cameras, paradoxically became a tool of protection for people in similar situations. Lawyers began systematically searching for security recordings in cases involving homeless people, and many cases were resolved when video evidence contradicted unfounded accusations. 2 years after his release, Robert Williams stood before an audience of law students at the local university, telling his story. He had transformed from a silent victim of the system into an eloquent advocate for change. His appearance had changed dramatically. He was clean, well-dressed, and most importantly, had that sparkle in his eyes that comes from having found purpose. That security camera didn't just save me, he told the students. It exposed a truth that our society prefers not to see. that we assume guilt based on appearance, on social status, on prejudices we don't even recognize we have. Sarah, now director of the Homeless Defense Initiative, was in the audience and smiled with pride. Robert's case had become the catalyst for the systematic changes she had dreamed of throughout her career. Hundreds of homeless people had been helped through programs that emerged in response to his story. The recording that had exonerated Robert became one of the most cited pieces of evidence in criminal justice reform cases. It was used in congressional hearings, documentaries, and awareness campaigns about systemic prejudice. What began as a simple security recording had become a powerful symbol of the need for equal justice. Detective Stevens, now working as private security, had been forced to confront his own prejudices. Though his police career had ended, he eventually sought out Robert to apologize personally. It was an uncomfortable but necessary moment that marked the beginning of his own journey of self-discovery and redemption. The case also changed how security recordings were used in the legal system. New protocols were implemented requiring police to check all available security cameras before making arrests, especially in cases involving vulnerable populations. Morrison's store became an example of how businesses can be part of the solution. Mr. Morrison, initially reluctant to get involved, became an active advocate for homeless rights. He hired several homeless individuals, provided professional training, and his store became a model for other businesses in the community. Robert maintained his humility despite all the attention. He continued to sleep in the same modest apartment he had obtained through the assisted housing program, and dedicated his life to helping others facing similar situations. His story had become bigger than himself, a powerful reminder that true justice requires constant vigilance and the courage to confront our own prejudices. The security camera that captured what no one saw that March night didn't just save Robert Williams. It illuminated truths about our society that needed to be seen. And in doing so, it proved that sometimes the simplest technology can be the most powerful tool for social change. If this story inspired you to think differently about justice, about the potential in every person, and about our responsibility to protect the most vulnerable, then please subscribe to our channel. We share stories like this every week. Real accounts of transformation, second chances, and the power of truth to change lives. Hit that subscribe button and join a community that believes everyone deserves dignity, opportunity, and justice, regardless of their circumstances.